At last, the Probation Service have done their job, it seems. He's been recalled.
Well, it seems that way, and we think he'll now have to spend at least another year behind bars, and will have to apply for parole once again. We understand he was arrested yesterday. It comes a couple of days after we first revealed that the identity of this drill rapper 10.
So you broke this, Thomas, didn't you? You broke this story.
We did, yeah. It's part of a team. We first revealed that the rapper 10 was in fact Jake Fahri, the notorious murderer of Jimmy Mizen. Obviously, that horrible incident in a bakery in May 2008, where Fahri, in a fit of rage, mid-argument, grabbed this Pyrex tray of sausages and used it to slash the gentle giant's throat. By all accounts, a big-hearted boy, and it seems after serving 15 years, a year longer than the minimum sentence handed down at the Old Bailey because of his behaviour in prison, he had to serve a year longer. It seems that time in prison hasn't reformed him at all, and now he is back behind bars today.
But Thomas, let's just so look, good, I'm glad. It's not particularly heartening to hear that he's only going back for another year, so I don't know what the rules are in such a regard, whether there is something in statute that if you get recalled back you do another year, or whether that was part of the original sentencing back in 2009. I don't know if you could elaborate on that in a second, but it's very concerning to hear also, though, that when he was granted licence in 2023 to be released, there were concerns raised about him and his ability to control his anger, yet the Probation Service decided to release him anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I could just read out some of that report in 2023. The board found he'd been unable to cope when he felt he was being disrespected. He had poor problem-solving skills, experienced difficulties with having and keeping a job, and yet despite these mitigating factors that you would think would actually play against him and would make the authorities more wary of releasing him, he was allowed out, having served that minimum term, and clearly hasn't changed a bit. And remarkably, when I spoke to Jimmy's family yesterday, they said that when Jake Fahri was being released, they sat down and decided that they could forgive him to the extent that they hope he would move on. He would start a family, get a job, turn his life around. And it seems now that having failed to do that, Jimmy Mizen's family are actually quite happy that this criminal has been put behind bars. And just to return to your point about him having to spend a year now back in prison, that's the length of time before he can apply again for parole. And at that point, the parole board will have to do another assessment. And you'd think after letting him out the first time, they may now take a bit more caution in regard to whether, if he comes out for the second time now from prison, how he'll behave in the future.
Well, I mean, Thomas, I don't hold a lot of hope. I mean, we've had many instances, of course, of the Probation Service, being quite lenient, should we say, when it comes to letting people out, like Gary Glitter, for instance, who was, of course, recalled almost immediately because, lo and behold, shock horror, he broke his licence conditions. We've had it with, murderers and big-time criminals, serious criminals, many times. I mean, there has to be serious questions asked there, I think, in terms of the parole board and parole board members that, of course, are made up of professionals and I think lay people as well, why they seem to be so suckered into sob stories and let dangerous people out on the streets only then to reoffend. I mean, it seems to happen more and more, doesn't it? Do you think it's because there's pressure on prison places?
Well, I think that might be part of it. Obviously, when he was sentenced, there was less pressure on prison places, and the judge, Mr. Calvert-Smith, at the Old Bailey at the time, took into account the fact Jake Fahri was 19 when he committed these offences. He is now 35.
I mean, so what? He's an adult.
No, I'm not defending him. He is absolutely an adult, but he is now 35. And obviously, he was held in a YOI, Young Offenders Institution, for a long time, got into fights, was a nuisance, disrespected officers, allegedly sexually assaulted a nurse during his sentence. I mean, those are all examples. You would think that when he comes before a parole board, they wouldn't let him out.
And that's right, that happened, and then they made the decision to let him out.
Correct, yeah.
Unbelievable. Questions need to be asked, don't they, surely? I mean, I know we talk about this a lot, and the trouble is, the parole system is completely unaccountable. Yes, we have politicians that oversee justice and so on, although obviously there's been a bit of a revolving door as such in recent months and years, but there's got to be some accountability here, because these probationary panels, this so-called service, and of course it's not a probation service at all, is it? Doesn't seem to be doing a service to Britain, the public and its population one little bit, but they are playing fast and loose with people's lives.
When I spoke to Jimmy's mum, Margaret, who's now a campaigner, she's actually in a primary school today spreading a message of peace, hope and forgiveness, and that in itself is, of course, remarkable. But
Brilliant.
She said that it's more than an apology that her family needs. It's easy to apologise and then do absolutely nothing. This now needs a real investigation into how he was released in the first place, but also the root causes of this sort of violence, which ruins just so many lives. And sadly, that number is only going up because of the failure across the country to tackle that problem.
Yeah, indeed. Were the family consulted at all when it came to the probationary process, do you know?
They were told in 2023 he was going to be released.
Not asked for their opinion as to whether, because the police now, as woke as they are, whenever there's an incident, of course, you immediately get a call asking, as a victim, are you okay? They kind of mop your brow metaphorically. So you would imagine that would extend to the family of a murder victim at least being asked for their opinion, their view on the murderer of their son being let out of prison after 15 years. I mean, that presumably in terms of some hat tip to their emotions, their wishes, that's not something that's granted to the victims' families.
Well, they sat down, when I spoke to them, they said they sat down, they came to the view that if Jake Fahri had been reformed, then he could come out. If he could turn his life around and demonstrate that he would now be an asset and not a burden on the community, then actually he did deserve a second chance. And sadly, he's completely blown that second chance. Not just blown it in a sense that he's failed, but he's actually used Jimmy Mizen's family's good grace and their wishes that he actually reformed and became a better person. He's taken that and blown it straight back in their face. It's incredibly disrespectful to them.
It is. Look, they sound like a very unnecessarily understanding and humble family, frankly, very forgiving in the face of horrendous and I would say unforgiving circumstances. And as you say, yes, he's stuck two fingers up at them, the judicial system and the public. And I suspect, I'm afraid, Thomas, what now happens is in a year's time he goes up for parole again. That is accepted on some weird and wonderful basis, even though no doubt in the next 12 months this individual, Jake Fahri, let's be honest, he will have further fights in prison. He will transgress. He will seek to do other things because he's a bit of a lad and because he's clearly got some issues with authority, this nonsense about people disrespecting me, so therefore I have to put a glass in their face. I mean, people like this shouldn't ever come out of prison, should they?
Well, I think there's a strong argument for that. The length of time that he was sentenced for clearly was not enough for him to reform himself in the justice system, and it is the only option now that he goes back in. And I mean, I'm personally very glad that after our campaign, after our investigation, that the Ministry of Justice and the police have very quickly arrested him and put him back in jail today. Yeah,
well, look, Thomas Godfrey at The Sun, fantastic work on exposing this and obviously for scooping it. Keep doing what you do and hopefully you'll keep following this and maybe putting some pressure on us, I'm sure you will, at The Sun to ensure that perhaps the hopeless, woeful probationary panels that seem to convene and let these people out of prison way before they should do, hopefully the pressure that The Sun can bring to bear will actually make the probation service and those panels think twice before releasing people like Jake Fahri on an unsuspecting public. Thomas, thanks very much indeed for joining us on Talk.